Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk security, which might not be something that you think we need to speak about with Jamstack, but that is my subject of choice at this point. Jamstack, Astro more specifically, and I think is a wise thing to actually speak about security and share what I've been learning recently about measures that we should take, or risk that we should be aware of, and measures that we can take. So I'm going to give you some resources, some information on what is out there, what's in the industry right now that's concerning people, and then what at least I've decided that I can kind of do to be more aware of this, and what checks you can put in place. It's kind of like this thing. Sorry, I'm tapping the mic there while I'm thinking. That's not very clever, is it? We're coming away from WordPress a lot because, if you're coming away from WordPress like I have, one of the reasons is the whole thing about security. All the way from the server, the PHP that's on there needs to be updated, through to the WordPress installation itself, the themes, the plugins, and just the process of querying to a database and that being open to injections and hijacking and all that kind of stuff. There's a tremendous exposure to risk in the runtime, in the front end experience of the website that you produce for someone, if it's on WordPress. And part of the attraction, and I've spoken about it here, is part of the attraction to Jamstack is the idea that it's a flat HTML page. Apart from, as I described in the last video, very small parts where it's hydrated by JavaScript, it's a flat HTML page, and that reduces the risk there to, it's pretty much zero. I think is what you could call zero. Certainly relative to anything you build with WordPress, you're in a really good spot. But as David's a really intelligent fellow. He's often on comment threads and stuff, and I'm really glad he's put this comment here, because it does really present something that we should be aware of and be thinking about more. And he makes the comment that recently there have been several major common vulnerabilities and exposures affecting Node, NPM, Next, and Tanstack code bases. And these supply chain attacks, and that's really the term that you need to understand if you want to look more into this, have raised questions about the future open source software by some, and it is certainly raising questions about the role AI plays in these security breaches by many. So, and here's an interesting point to keep in mind, because it will be relevant to what we speak about later. It is also true that GitHub Actions may have contributed to some attacks, and maybe it's a layer of Swiss cheese that needs updating, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Okay, cool. So this is really interesting, and it's a big subject. What David is referring to here is it's not just the general concern that a lot of people have about vibe coding and AI coding having vulnerabilities. Like, you make an app 15 minutes on Lovable and you've released it for production. Is it really worth, having charged somebody £900 for something that's going to crash in 3 months and now their business is reliant on it? Do you want that lawsuit? It's not actually so much about that. It's this actually, in some ways, this is quite relevant to people that aren't even using AI. It's just about Node and NPM and the way that we might install things from our machine from somewhere, install packages onto our machine and then build that into a code base. Has that been vetted, and is that safe to take into our project, to put onto our machine? Because obviously anything that we download onto our machine could have been compromised. And what David is referring to here is, it was only about a week ago. I can't actually remember the date. I can't remember the date now. But it was a 6-minute window when there was it was a GitHub repository that was compromised, and then that was able to poison, I was going to say. I need a better word than that, but compromise, there we go. Compromise packages that were then installed via NPM to an incredible amount of machines. Now, I can't remember the exact details here. It was mainly Jamstack code bases that were involved, and Mistral, which I've not ever even used. But essentially, if you were downloading anything at this point and installing npm install anything that was compromised onto your machine through your terminal, or Claude was doing it for you, then you may well have downloaded some very compromised files. What it was really looking for was tokens for GitHub, keys that it could use to get permissions to, I think it was then to create something in GitHub, create repositories, which a ton of repositories were created with other people's credentials. But the scariest thing was that if you realized that your tokens had been compromised and you switched them out, it would wipe your entire machine, which is scary as hell, isn't it? Like, scary as hell. You do npm install, you're doing your little project, Claude is telling you how amazing you are, and before you know it, you've downloaded something that's compromised onto your machine, it's looking for tokens, it's doing other stuff in your GitHub, and then if you become aware of it, you wipe it or change the tokens and it wipes your entire machine. It's very, very scary, and it's something that we should be more aware of. So that's what David is saying there, where the GitHub actions were involved there, because that was their entry point somehow, and I'm not brainy enough to know all of the specifics. But the main thing that we need to know is if we are there running something and installing things, packages onto our machine in our little projects, is that a vulnerability? Yes, it is, unfortunately. Now, I had Gemini help me create a little bit of a diagram, and most of it's shit, to be honest. But this bit is where I wanted to have a little peek, because the question for me was, okay, this was the way that this compromise worked, and you need to research it more. And it's the mini Shai-Hulud worm or malware compromise. But Google that, and what it was there was a bigger one that happened quite a few years ago. It's not something that's just been isolated. This thing does exist and it does happen. All the more reason for us to be more aware of it if we're coming to this space as noobs, really. The vulnerability exists in the node and npm thing, which I wish I hadn't used that term because it's quite flippant there. But essentially, this is why it's called a supply chain attack, because when we're building things, there are different packages that we tend to sort of have installed. And the problem, so if you've heard of Node.js, if you've started to play around in all of this, and Node.js is kind of like the space is like the engine, as it puts here, but then you download all of the packages, and that's what you might be pulling in for different UI elements or different functionality. And the problem is that we might not be really paying attention to what we're downloading via Node as packages, or more than that, when we have something such as install dependencies, we might trust Astro, for example, but Astro has a little part in its setup, and you might have seen it on these videos, that says, do you want to install the dependencies? And everyone's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. It's part of the process, right, dude? Well, that is one of the vulnerabilities, because who is vetting those dependencies? And that's where we get into a little bit of a, there could be anything in one of those dependencies. And this is where this bit of the diagram comes in. And I'm going to state again, this is me on my learning curve. I'm really piecing all of these things together. And I wanted to get to the point where I'm understanding it enough to be actionable, at least showing precaution in how I'm doing things. And I thought I'd just bring that to the video since David brought it to the comments. I thought, yeah, let's talk on that in case other people are feeling a bit nervous. So we might install Astro, and it might install some dependencies, and it can have a bit of a knock-on down. Something else that has been installed as a dependency might actually have its own dependency. And if something down here has been poisoned, it's going to compromise your entire package. And then you're kind of screwed, right? So, yeah, that's not a good position to be in. The idea of vetting all of the dependencies and being aware of what we're downloading, one, onto our machine, and two, into our projects, is overwhelming. Yeah, it's just simply overwhelming. So, something I was bouncing around here is that, it's a bit of a pendulum, pick your poison. WordPress, there's this kind of problem where we have a live site that we've put together and we know the risks. We download plugins or themes, we use different builders, and then we try and guard the front door. That's how I was trying to piece it together. So we build the castle and then we post guards at the door and we keep everything updated. We lock the doors, we keep it barred, keep the windows barred, and all that kind of stuff. It's a different thing when we're dealing with supply chain, all right, because we are literally getting the problem built into the potentially the problem built into the foundation of the castle. So suddenly I just had War of the Worlds come into my head, where the ships are actually beneath us, and they have been for years, and then they come up out of the ground, something like that. So yeah, kind of an interesting thing to think, wow, all right, it's a whole different area of risk. Jamstack is, once you've built it, secure on the, and Astro, they're secure on the runtime, they're secure on the front. Your clients can be really happy with you about the fact that their site is really secure, it's flat HTML, there's nothing really to worry about on that front. The real question is, when you built it, were you sure of the dependencies that you put into the project? Is everything safe in that code base? Is your machine going to, if you change the tokens, get wiped? Don't want to scare you, but so essentially, as David commented here, it's in the Node, NPM, Next, Tanstack kind of code bases. All these three I've mentioned on this channel as part of the Jamstack kind of run. I've never used Tanstack, very glad to say. So the question is, when we're thinking of Jamstack and Astro, does this affect us? Is this a pickle? So let's get this into a bit of perspective. What I wanted to understand was, when we're dealing with Astro, are those dependencies safe, and how can we know that they're safe? How do we, when we install Astro, know that there hasn't been some sort of compromise in the past 24 hours or whatever, and that all of that is safe for us to download? That's what I really wanted to kind of settle on. What I wanted to know was that we could get a trusted stack together and feel sure of the fact that we're using safe components. So what can we actually do about this? How can we start vetting the things that, whatever we're installing through NPM? How can we know that the dependencies are safe? So that even if we're doing a check on the initial thing that we want to install, generally it's considered safe. Generally it's considered to be, a good company or a good provision. But they're asking me if I want to download dependencies. How do I know that they are safe and that they are vetting those? And that's where I started to butt heads against the idea of different provisions, and think about getting a trusted stack together. So funnily enough, somebody on the last video asked about Sanity and Strappy. I think I'm saying that right, Strut API or something like that. It might be something like that. And this was one of the first examples that came up in my little bits of research, because I was asking, well, is Sanity okay? I use Astro and Sanity. Are they regarded as trusted, part of my trusted stack? And Sanity came up as a trusted item, mainly because it's a very guarded team. There's a team of professional engineers that are taking care of the CSO responsibilities, Chief Security Officer, while there is quite a bit of Sanity that is open source, or it is entirely open source. I'm not entirely sure, if I'm honest. It's a very robust team that works around it, and they take responsibility for checking on the dependencies, any dependencies that are used in that latest in any latest download. But it's important to know actually that Sanity is something that we use that is external to our project. What we install is the studio. That's the bit that we actually bring into our project. But we can rest assured that there is a CSO or a CSO team in place that's checking all of the dependencies. And so we can have trust in the Sanity team and that system. This is as far as I understand it, to know that they have been doing all of the checks and vetting everything. This is when I'm going to go with Strapi. Or is it Strapi API? I see API there, so I'm like, is it something like that? I don't know. Anyway, apparently this is more, there's more vulnerability here. It's not so managed, it's not so vetted, and I believe that there are more dependencies that are included in it. Now, that's the first thing that I'm going on, and at this point where I want to be cautious, I'm gonna stand by that and be like, well, okay then. Somebody wants to know my opinion on Sanity and this one that I'm not going to say. I have more faith that this has a CSO presence, that anything that's downloaded from that, I can check latest versions, I can ensure that there have been no known vulnerabilities to the one, anything that I'm going to download, and then I can go ahead and do it. That's also the same with Astro, by the way. When I'm looking at a trusted tech stack, Astro, even though it installs dependencies, it's a very simple setup, and the dependencies that it does come with, or it's vetted by the Astro team, and this falls in line with the trusted stack kind of criteria, where it's a smaller animal. It's guarded by a team of security engineers and people that are doing all of that vetting that is necessary to know that it's safe. So that's kind of where I'm sitting on this. Let's have a look at the next slide, because I don't entirely remember. I wanted to have a bit of a guide to Jamstack security, things that I could put in place to ensure that I'm feeling okay. One of them is a trusted stack. And so, as I've said, I go along with Sanity or Contentful. I've never used it, but I would check that out now before that Strappy one. But I love Sanity personally. I think it's a great experience. Because they have high tier security teams and the supply chain is managed for you. So, I can trust that they are guarding the supply chain. And so part of the security measures I would take now is to, one, choose carefully. All right, I want SaaS, or I want a team of engineers that are guarding that product or that package. And also I would want to be able to check that after any updates, I'm not going to immediately update. I want to know that it's been out there for a week and that version has not been known to have any compromise. So we've got Sanity for things like content. I would go with that. Payments, e-commerce, I would use Stripe or Paddle. This is what's been recommended to me at this point. I'd welcome any other info. I actually have no need for that at the moment, but I'll take that on board. Email notifications, or an email system. Resend, which I'm really relieved about, came up. It's excellent and secure. So that's the one that I've been using anyway, and I've really enjoyed it. So I'm happy about that. The other one that I wanted to actually properly ask about was page find, because I consider that to be the way that I would use search index on any Astro site. So I've not had to use it yet on a product, on a actual production site or anything. But the idea of doing so has had me research, and this one always comes up as the leader of it. There's also Algolia, but this one seems to be the winner. But for reasons I'll show you in a minute, this one has a bit of a compromise anyway, which is interesting. It's a bit like Next.js. So you can see that I'm already doing phase one of my keep safe with Jamstack security measures. It's in the choice of what we actually will even consider using. And I want to know that there's a team around whatever I want to use, and that they are guarding the supply chain, they are managing it, that they are conscious of security, and essentially taking that out of my hands. So this is a bit similar to WordPress and plugins and themes. You're going to use those, or you should use those, that aren't so independent, they're not so open source, that you know what's going into them, and that people have a real interest in keeping it safe, keeping it secure, keeping it robust, and keeping its reputation high. That's what all of these have, which I need to trust in that. And that goes also with, these are additional to Astro. Astro is a small installation. It's a small setup. It does have dependencies, but we'll discuss this. There's a package lock JSON that you get in that file, and it is insisting that only the dependencies that it has specifically defined are getting installed on your machine, so you can trust that. So yeah, that's pretty reassuring. Okay, cool. So define your stack. That's what we've been talking about here. Know, trust, monitor tool sets. Choose managed SaaS where possible. That's why I'm leaning towards Sanity even more, even though the experience of it is amazing anyway. I haven't felt the need to look elsewhere, to be honest. Secure your environment. Use Git environment secrets for all keys. Okay, so that's something to so e.g. Shopify private keys. On my Shopify demo, I just sort of splat it in. Obviously, I think I could have done that better, and I need to define that a bit more. And prevent local or commit leakage. So if you put it in manually early, it's still somewhere in your commits. If you then add environment secrets and do it properly, it's still somewhere in your commits. So you should do it from the beginning. Manage dependencies. This is really kind of what all of it's about. Stop npm install during known crisis. So I've got a slide for you in a minute that shows you more about this. But I just mentioned this when I was talking about how I know who I want to use now, but before I actually install from them, I'm going to take a moment to check for any risk factors that might be known in the last 15 minutes or 24 hours. They're quite quick to report. And you can also, and I've not done this yet, check npm audit. So yeah, that's something that maybe I'll do on a more in-depth video when I'm a bit more familiar with it. Use OIDC handshakes. This is what GitHub and Vercel have between them. So you open this pop-up and you link it up, and GitHub and Vercel, they then know each other, and GitHub will make the request when you've done an update to GitHub and it wants to build on Vercel. It's going to reinitiate that handshake, and then there's a very timed token. I think it's only 15 minutes where there's this sort of temporary token and the key, and it will delete after that, and it just won't work. So that's better than having one of those passwords that's a long-lived token. Oh, I can't select it. So yeah, that gets set up in your process anyway between GitHub and Vercel when you're setting that up. But I'll be honest, I didn't know that's what it was doing. The process just out of the box, Vercel is taking care of that and insisting that that is the process. So again, that really does increase my trust in Vercel. And then use Astro Islands to keep client code siloed. Static data is inherently safer at runtime. That's again returning more to the runtime risk, which is largely not there for Jamstack sites, which is cool. Okay, so really what I've kind of settled on is I want to get a trusted stack, which is Astro, Sanity, one of these. Obviously I would have done that anyway, and I'm glad that I'm already using Resend, and I'm glad I'd settled on PageFind, because all of these came up as very either secure or secure and quite static, so that they're not relying on front-end processes or further dependencies. So yeah, that made me feel quite quite good, really. I was already halfway there and I didn't realize it. So here's a simplified table just to try and help this bed in. And again, a lot of this is what I was creating for me to understand more. But these are suggestions to keep in your trusted stack and some that you should avoid. And it's worth understanding why. So we've got CMS content. Go with sanity or contentful. I've not tried this one, but that would be the next on my list now. Data is isolated. Don't forget, you're using the sanity system outside of your project. It's the studio that you're bringing into your file base there. Web framework, Astro. I don't know why it's saying Astro Islands. I've got Gemini to make this, but it's 0.js. Build time dependency lock, site search, page find. It's local index, 0 external SDKs. So another one that's suggested is Algolia. I've really not used it, but it uses external API SDKs, and there's potential for injection there. I didn't know that, but it's coming up in the security sort of audit. I'll take note of that. Email service resend, as I said, that came up. Postmark, I've heard of it, I've not used it, but yeah, this is encouraging. 0 npm packages, that sounds like a win. Mailgun was a bit like, oh no, because that's a little bit in my world. But heavy node packages packed with subdependencies. So the vulnerability there is not necessarily, it's not about Mailgun being bad. It got a really high reputation, but they very much put it onto the developer to, take responsibility for everything. And that means you've got to kind of vet a lot of subdependencies, I suppose. So, with ignorance, I possibly wouldn't have realized that, but that's exactly how we end up with some issue down here, being an issue up here. So yeah, not cool. Oh God, I've got more. I've been learning a lot, and I make these slides to consolidate, and then I can reflect on them later, like my little revision cards. And so that's what I'm bringing to you guys. Application database. Again, I have no need to look at that at the moment, but these are maybe something to keep in mind. Yeah. So what do we have here? The security checklist. This is really what it's all coming down to. So environment and key management. All right. So what can we do here? Never hard code secrets. I've said this just now. Even if you do it at an early version and then commit to GitHub and then correct that, it's somewhere in a commit. So that's not cool. Compromise free. Avoid Git leakage. Git ignore. If you don't know how to do that, you need to look at that. But Claude should be, if you're using Claude, ask Claude about that, and it would define it for you anyway. Use GitHub environment secrets. Safely inject credentials for production builds. Ditch long-lived passwords. We've actually already been over that one. But yeah, if they're not there, they can't be hijacked. And yeah, that's a good idea. Dependency management. Native code first. Commit the lock file. Package lock JSON. So you can actually see that in. If you look in your Astro. Look in your Astro download when you install an Astro package, if you dare, and you'll see package lock JSON. Have a look in there and you'll see all of these specifics. And what that is doing is basically saying only download those, only install these that have been defined here. And that's as far as I understand it, that's Astro ensuring that only that has been vetted and is safe is installed, and anything differing from that won't get installed. So that's important to know. And then run terminal audits. That's interesting. I've not done that yet. I'm just consolidating what I've learned here. This is something that this makes sense to me. The 15-minute rule. So wait for socket.dev and sneak scans before updates. It's a real myth. This is something I found out even when I was on LinkedIn and everyone was saying like WordPress is cooked, make a static site and you never have to do an update again. And it didn't take long to see that that isn't the case. You should be updating things, even if it is sort of Jamstack and especially if it's Next.js. But yes, before you do that, if you hear that there's an update, don't just go, ooh, let's update. Very much like on WordPress, really. Let other people update and see what problems arise for a while. 15-minute rule, or even better, 24 hours. And then we need resources. I've got some for you. This is where you would go and check to make sure that nothing has arisen that you should be aware of. And GitHub advisory and socket for compromises. That's this one. It's repeating itself. So essentially, really, it's choose managed isolation, so true SAS, so sanity, minimize heavy node SDKs, so anything that just gets a load of dependencies installed with it that you can't monitor, compile is repeating itself. So as well as those measures, this is the one that I'm really like, oh, okay, that's interesting. A proactive security tool that analyzes the deep nested dependency trees of NPM packages before you download them. Okay, now this actually has a site. Okay, and again, this is all theory at this point. I would love people to comment and educate me more. Tell me if I've got anything wrong. Tell me if it's on the right track. But, unlimited developers and repos, 1,000 scans per month. That sounds pretty cool. But what this does is checks the packages before you actually get them onto your machine, which is awesome. This is one that you have more integrated into your GitHub, which seems sensible to me. And then, being completely honest, GitHub advisory database. I had a look here, and yeah, shit. You got to know what you're on about, and maybe that's one of the things that we've got to be aware of. There's a lot of info there, isn't there? But that's kind of where I'm sitting with things. There are ways for us to mitigate the risk, and we should be aware of what they are. But as far as I'm sitting right now, Astro is pretty safe. It doesn't bring in a lot of dependencies that you're unaware of, and it's not on one of these slides. But, oh yeah, it is. Next.js is server heavy, but not only does it have a lot of dependencies that it's going to bring in, but there are live runtime dependencies, and it's vulnerable 24/7. Now, if you've got more to, elaborate on that for me and help me understand this more, then that's great. But I suppose where I'm sitting is Astro, again, is showing that it has a dedicated team around it. It's very lightweight, but you get a hell of a lot for what it is. And if you follow this little checklist, if you just are a little bit aware of that Astro has your back, you can check for any recent vulnerabilities, check that it only has the set dependencies and that they are safe, that there are no issues reported, then you're safe enough to download that. If you're going to install other things into your project, then you need to go through the same process of deciding what they are, whether they can be trusted. Do they install lots of other dependencies that you haven't been able to vet, or they're not asked to vet? And double check any of these other resources for any compromises or any notifications of compromise. So again, give it that window of at least 15 minutes, preferably 24 hours. That's kind of where I'm sitting with this. But Astro, if you're worried about the node NPM kind of risk, I think that this is how you mitigate that risk, and that's the supply chain risk. That's what we're trying to mitigate and make sure that we're safe for. But yes, then we have the mitigated risk of supply chain, and then Astro on the front end. We don't have to be guarding the doors and so worried at that point, like we do with WordPress. So again, best of both worlds, but there is security to keep in mind there, I suppose. This one, bit loose. This is more as I'm learning it and getting my revision cards together, and I thought I'd bring that forward while it's at least kind of fresh in my head. But obviously, this is one to research more and get more secure with. But yeah, Astro is still safe. The supply chain is okay. Just do those checks. Once you go up to something like Next.js and some other little services, you've got to start doing some homework and be a bit more diligent, I think. That's where I'm sitting with it. So, comments below, please. I'd find them very interesting. Like, subscribe. Don't forget, Fuse Studio is a great tool for Astro, and there's a discount code in the description below. Until next time, catch you later.